We are back with our Ken Burns The American Revolution documentary reviews. Today we are reviewing episode 4 titled Conquer by a Drawn Game, which details the revolution from January 1777 through February 1778. As with all my reviews, we'll hit on a few touch points surrounding the macro events and happenings of 1777, which in this case was the capital city of Philadelphia falling into British hands, as well as a massive American victory up at Saratoga. Towards the end of the episode, we see how the French enter the revolution, truly turning the war on its head. Like every good Ken Burns documentary, there are a ton of awesome anecdotes thrown in throughout, which we will mention on today's review. The story of episode 4 begins in early 1777, where the British are very confident in their current position. They occupy New York as well as a lot of southeastern Pennsylvania, where they believe securing the capital city of Philadelphia will lead ultimately to the American demise. I think it's fair to say that history does not paint British General Howe in a very positive light. I've been critical of him on these reviews, comparing him to General George McClellan of the Union throughout the United States Civil War. Howe, seemingly, whenever he has the American army pinned, never goes for the full finish. But here in Philadelphia, it is a bit different. Washington meets Howe at Brandywine in Pennsylvania and gets badly outmaneuvered by the British. General Washington leaves the capital city of Philadelphia exposed, and Congress literally runs out of the city before the British invade. By the summer of 1777, Philadelphia had really established itself as the epicenter of the 13 colonies. It was where the United States was formed, where the Declaration of Independence was written and signed. It was also a place where all representatives of all 13 colonies would go to meet and, really decide the fate and the future of this budding country. Because of this, the British put so much emphasis on its capture. By no means did the Patriots want to lose Philadelphia, and as I mentioned, Congress literally scrambled out of the city as the British approached. But it wasn't as critical to American success as the British had opined. Of course, Washington would have loved to defeat the British forces at the Battle of Brandywine, and it was another battle where he was outmaneuvered, similarly to the Battle of Long Island. That said, the loss of the capital city of Philadelphia really didn't hurt the American troops in a tactical sense. What Washington had to protect from was the hurt to the Patriot morale and what it meant to lose a capital city. But as we've seen throughout the first 3 episodes and what we'll see in episode 4, while General Washington wasn't the best battle tactician, what he was really good at was keeping the morale of his troops high and bringing together groups of people. Although in 1777 the Americans were having little success on the Mid-Atlantic front, Generals Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold were making things happen in New York. At the same time the British were taking the Americans to the woodshed in Philadelphia, British General John Burgoyne was leading roughly 10,000 troops down the Hudson River from Quebec and through New York. Burgoyne's southern advance is initially successful. He takes Fort Ticonderoga without a fight, and his men pursue the retreating Patriots both south and east. However, his drive stalls and the campaign suffers a horrible loss to the Patriots in the Battle of Bennington. The two sizable armies, the British led by General John Burgoyne and the Americans led by General Horatio Gates, were essentially sizing each other up for the latter months of the summer of 1777. Nearly 200 miles north of the larger British army in New York City, the Americans were blocking John Burgoyne and his troops from traveling south. They held the high ground of southern Saratoga. It was here, in southern Saratoga, where after weeks of standoff, the armies came to a head, culminating in 2 of the most transformative battles of the American Revolution. The first clash takes place on September 19, 1777, today referred to as the Battle of Freeman's Farm. American riflemen pick off British officers through the trees from the forest, but both sides take heavy casualties. When the smoke clears, the battle is essentially a stalemate. General Burgoyne and the British technically hold Freeman's Farm in the field, but because they are cut off from the larger British army down in New York City, they cannot afford the losses. The Americans, on the other hand, get stronger every single day as enforcements pour in from New England. Given the worsening condition of his troops and his limited supplies, 3 weeks later, Burgoyne tries the American forces again, this time at Bemis Heights. This, however, is where everything collapses for the British. The Americans have the fortified high ground. Their line is tight, well-positioned, and far more numerous than their counterparts. Burgoyne launches an attack anyway, and it turns into disaster for the Redcoats. Benedict Arnold, who technically wasn't even supposed to be on the battlefield after a dust-up with Horatio Gates, charges in, rallies the American troops, and leads a series of bold counterattacks. His actions smashed the British lines and forced them into a panicked retreat. With his army surrounded, starving, and out of options, General John Burgoyne does something unimaginable for a British officer at the time. He surrenders his troops to the Americans. He hands over his entire force, 6,000 soldiers along with roughly 600 women and children who had followed the army throughout New York and Canada. The British surrender at Saratoga is one of the monumental moments of the Revolutionary War for multiple reasons. Firstly, it is one of the largest British capitulations in the history of their country. Secondly, it proves the American forces not only can run and hold off British attacks, but they can inflict damage of their own. Finally, it changes the course of global politics. News of the American win convinces France that the US can actually stand up to Britain. Soon after, the French sign a formal alliance with the United States, bringing their navy, money, and manpower into the war. You have to remember, just weeks before, Washington was outmaneuvered at Brandywine, and the British took the capital city of Philadelphia. The victory at Saratoga could not have come at a better time for the Patriots. At this point in the late 18th century, Great Britain and France had what kids today would call generational beef. France was watching, waiting on the sidelines, just hoping for proof that the Americans could hold their own. Once this happened at the Battle of Saratoga, the French happily joined the war, recognizing American independence and entering the war as America's ally. Everything Ken Burns does in his documentaries is for a reason. There's a reason he uses certain visuals, there's a reason he uses certain quotes and anecdotes, and there's a reason he titled episode 4, Conquer by a Drawn Game. Conquer by a drawn game means you don't have to crush your enemy. You just have to stay alive long enough so they don't crush you. Once Washington recognizes this and that he is fighting on his homeland, it becomes his entire strategy. He retreats, he avoids getting cornered, he preserves the army even when it means giving up territory. Critics call him weak for it, but this episode shows the truth. Survival is the strategy and endurance is the victory. The British want a knockout punch. They overextend themselves in places like Saratoga. But Washington refuses to give them what they want. He refuses to step into the ring. And of course, victories at Saratoga by Horatio Gates play monumental factors in tipping the scale towards the side of the Americans. That said, Washington keeping his army intact and on the run from the British at the most opportune times is why the revolution ultimately favored the Americans. Thank you for tuning into the episode 4 review of Ken Burns' The American Revolution. I hope you're enjoying this documentary as much as I am. I've been really intrigued with the storytelling of Burns and how you start in episode 1 with the small skirmishes and battles of Lexington and Concord, the Boston Massacre, which left 5 dead in 1770, and you fast forward to episode 4, which I just detailed. You had 6,000 British surrender at Saratoga. You have the French join the war, truly turning the revolution into a global conflict. But the through line throughout of independence and justice really stands firm through Burns' storytelling and is what I think is going to make episode 5 and 6 terrific.